So let's talk about the legislative process, guys. The state representative thought this is a good idea. She worked with the lawyers, or he worked with the lawyers in the House of Representatives, and put together sort of a framework of an idea. There may be language, there may not be language, and by language we're talking about the actual language in the bill, but they kind of had the framework for an idea and they put a co-sponsorship memo out. So many different ways for a bill to really sort of work its way to introduction of an actual language, right? You might have an idea, you think you don't want to get up early because you just don't want to get up early, right? You want to sleep in a little bit. Who doesn't want to sleep in a little bit before they go to school? Maybe you know Representative Farry. And you can go by yourself to Representative Farry and get him put a bill in. That could work, right? But maybe you don't know Representative Farry. Maybe you're a teacher. Your teachers are here, right? Teachers are represented by who? Do you know? Neshaminy is AFT, right? But either way, there's teachers' unions. Maybe teachers at school level have a good idea, or what they think is a good idea, that they want to see introduced as legislation. They can go to their union. Their unions can work with legislators that they work with and create legislation. Or maybe you hire me. Right? Maybe you're somebody who doesn't have good ties to Pennsylvania. You're a business here, but you don't live here, you don't work here, you don't operate here. You have idea, you think something's wrong in the state, you think something should be changed in the state, you can go to a lobbyist. We talk about this just because there's so many different ways to really get legislation moving and going. Sometimes it's a group of people meeting together, rallying, getting news coverage, creating sort of a buzz around an issue, and a legislator who might not even be part of it could pick that bill up. But now, let's just keep walking through. So let's just say, so that's happened, there is a bill, right? So now we're at what we were just talking about earlier, the co-sponsorship memo phase. When I first started working for Senator Tomlinson as his chief of staff, I actually thought I was going to read every single co-sponsorship memo that came across and try to determine what would be good ideas. The interesting thing about these ideas and about co-sponsorship memos and bills, and I think Representative Thomas just kind of hit on it, is there are so many. And a lot of times many are, shall we say, far-fetched in a way that's not exactly wrong, but you could also call them crazy. I didn't call them crazy, you did. A lot of times you stay off. You can sign on to a bill at any time. So, you stay off. I think our take, and there's two different ways to look at it. When I was in Tommy's office, we generally didn't sign on to legislation. We waited to watch legislation happen. We signed on to legislation that was close to us, that was important to us. Tommy does a lot related to transportation, education, and gaming. So those three sort of topic areas, we would pretty much look at every bill that was introduced and potentially join them. But other than that, we kind of stay away. Now there's a state representative actually from Bucks County who signs on to tons of bills. So there's kind of two different ways to approach that.
But signing on is very ceremonial. It's very easy when a constituent group or somebody comes and you say, oh yeah, I co-sponsored that bill, I support it. But you don't know what's going to happen. You haven't read the language because you get the co-sponsor memo and then the language comes out later. So you don't truly know what the language is. You don't know if the bill is going to get amended in committee ultimately. And sometimes it gets amended on the floor and becomes something completely different. Now your name's on a bill that does something completely different than what you want, which we all have ways of fixing it. But we're talking about policy and drafting of laws and how bills become law and the like. But there's the politics of things too, and what your opponent's going to say about you in the next election. And unfortunately, the politics seems to carry the day more than bipartisanship good policy, which I'm hopeful that that's not the direction you folks ultimately end up in. It's not the direction a lot of us want to end up in. We just want to go out there and do a good job to represent our whole community.
To Frank's point, 3 years ago now, it's 2015, almost 4 years ago, oh my gosh, we passed what was literally the largest gambling expansion piece of legislation since, I guess, this table games bill in 2010. And that bill started off, it was a Representative Ortiz's bill, and it was a problem gambling bill. So the original language of that bill, if you signed on to that co-sponsorship memo, you were signing on to a co-sponsorship memo that was going to make it tougher for gambling addicts to get back into a casino. After that worked its way through the process, which we'll get on to the next step soon, forget about all that. That bill expanded gambling to the largest gambling expansion, quite frankly, in the country for any state. So it just kind of shows you how you can think you're signing on to one piece of legislation, but by that time that legislation works its way through, it's a whole separate issue. We've got language. We had a co-sponsorship memo. We're signed on. We now have an introduced bill. What happens to that bill? Come on, somebody. You looked at me, so you shouldn't look at me. What happens to the bill? So we introduced it. You got language. It's Representative Thomas's bill. Representative Farry signed on to it. Where does it go next?
What are we doing at 10:15? Look on the screen.
It goes to committee, right? And there are, I used to know this number. Nick, how many standing committees are there in the Senate? 23? I forget. There is a certain number of standing committees in both the Senate and the House. Standing committee is a committee that is instituted every single session by the rules of the House and or Senate. There are special committees that sometimes exist. Currently, I don't believe. You have a House in Transportation Infrastructure. Is that an actual committee, though, or is it just a task force?
Transportation is a committee.
So there are sometimes special committees created just to tackle one issue. But generally, your standing committees deal with all the bills. So in the Senate, for example, and I keep reverting to the Senate because that's my where I come from, you introduce a bill, goes through the co-sponsorship process, and it gets referred to the, or gets sent to the Senate President Pro Tem. In the House, it's a speaker, correct?
Correct.
The speaker then makes a judgment call. And sometimes this can be contentious, right? We had a piece of legislation that we thought should have went to a certain committee, went to another committee. Nick will tell you Senator Thomas wasn't too happy about that, neither were we. But now that bill gets sent to a committee. What is a committee? Any ideas? You're going to be doing it today, so I hope you have a little bit of an idea. Yes?
A group of officials that are meant to debate on bills relating to a certain topic or a certain area of expertise.
Is that written down somewhere?
No.
That's a really good debate. Or that's a really good answer. She's right? A group of elected officials who meet regularly to work on legislation that's related to a certain topic. You've got 5 sitting here: consumer affairs, education, health, judiciary, and transportation. So a bill will go into a committee. Any idea what's the breakdown of the committee? Do you know how that works? Did we go over that at all? No. So obviously you've got a majority chair and a minority chair. In the House, Republicans are in the majority, so the Republicans control the committees. The majority chair is a Republican. Generally, the makeup of the committees match the makeup of the House. So proportionally speaking. So if there's 60% Republican reps and 40% Democrat, a committee would generally be made up of 60 and 40. That bill moves. Let's say the bill that we're talking about, it's the move back the start time of school bill. That's in Education Committee, clearly. The Education Committee would do all the work on that bill, right? You would then, what does a committee do? Anybody? Everybody's look, yes?
Changes and like marks up a bill?
Sure, can hold hearings on a bill, right? That start time bill, I bet you have a lot of interested parties who want to weigh in, right? Your teachers' unions will want to weigh in. Your school board association will want to weigh in. Some of your local school boards themselves would probably want to weigh in. I bet you parents would want to weigh in, right? There's a lot of interested parties at stake in a piece of legislation like that. So they would hold a hearing on it, might hold a couple hearings. Sometimes they travel across the state. Sometimes they'll hold hearings in Southeast PA, Southwest PA, try to give everybody a chance to come out and share their opinion or at least see what's going on. And then they would vote on the bill. So generally your Education Committee or your standing committee does most of the work on the nuts and bolts of a piece of legislation. Then as we said, and it would be referred to the House, but then it would go to rules or appropes. It would work its way through there. You don't normally see a lot of battles in rules of appropes for legislation that's already been worked out. If it's contentious, if something goes through on a party line vote, the rules or appropes votes could turn out to be somewhat of an issue, right? You might actually have to fight in there, but generally it's almost accepted that if you can get it through committee, it will go through rules or appropes the right way. And then it goes to the floor.
The committee members can actually amend a bill. So any one of those 25 committee members can amend the bill to the committee. So let's say you're the 25 that are on the Education Committee in the PA House. Any one of you can file an amendment to that starting of school time bill. You are the rest of the House and not on education. You can't do anything at the committee level. So if the bill gets amended, if 13 of the 25 vote for the amendment, the bill then gets reported out of committee as amended. When it gets to the House floor, it has a 3-day process. It's read over the desk, not literally read, they just read the bill number on the first day. Second day, any one of the 203 House members can amend the bill. And all you do is vote on amendments that day. And then third is
And you can have 50, 60, 70,
400
on one bill.
Yeah. So,
which would take hours and hours and hours.
And sometimes when people load up a bill like that, we call it Christmas treeing it. It's like hanging all the ornaments on the Christmas tree. A lot of times that is intended to kill the bill. It's intended to be a means to defeat the bill. Because to go through 400 amendments and have all of the debate on those 400 amendments, I mean, you couldn't do that in a week.
So let's get to that, though. So how would that work out, right? Say you're the minority party, you don't like a piece of legislation, you have your members lined up, it's always coordinated, each member puts up 15 different amendments. To Frank's point, we've now got 400 amendments on a piece of legislation that under the rules of the House, we have to debate and vote on. Now, if you're the majority party, your leadership, you don't want that to happen. Minority party does that just to bring a majority party to the table, right? Maybe now we can cut a deal on 2 or 3 points of that bill in exchange for dropping 350 amendments, right? So there's a lot of strategy involved. It's not just, simple or I got an idea. There's a lot of strategy involved with how with how leadership in the House and the Senate plays with amendments, plays with a lot of different sort of legislative tools.
And there's a lot of politics that comes into it too, because a lot of times the minority party will file amendments that are good in concept, what they do. So let's say somebody files a school safety amendment to the starting time of school bill. Well, that's a good amendment, but it may not be the right amendment to actually be in that bill. It may not be the right thing. But so we want to defeat that amendment because we just want to focus on the start time of school. But now Frank Farry voted against safe schools, right? And that's what's going to be in the mailers that are going to flood your mailboxes in my future election. So there's a lot of politics that bleeds into it as well, which is unfortunately dirty, but it's unfortunately where our government is right now. But that may prevent that whole bill from coming up.
Yep.
So I mean all those bad votes that may be piled on the majority party may prevent that bill from coming up.
Because Frank's saying, I don't want to vote on that. Hey, leadership, you guys have to fix this. Go work with the other side, come up with something. And it's not just Representative Farry, it'd be, quite frankly, a whole group of reps saying, we don't want to deal with that issue. You have anything else?
Yeah, so what happens, so we're just talking about the House.
Yep.
So
now everything we just talked about.
Yeah, and just because a bill's introduced and referred to a committee doesn't mean it's going to be brought up in that committee. The chairperson, majority chair, may or may not bring that bill up. And then just because a bill passes committee doesn't mean that the majority leader is going to schedule it for a floor vote. And then ultimately the Speaker of the House is actually going to call that bill up for a vote. So a lot of bills pass committee and then die on the floor. A lot of bills maybe get to second consideration, maybe get through the amendment process, or they get to second and there's too many amendments and they die. So, but let's say a bill passes, goes through committee, goes through the House process, goes through the amendment process, passes. So on third day, the third consideration, it's just a straight up or down vote, and you need 102 votes to pass it. When it's amendments, you just need a majority of the members of the House present. So sometimes we have some vacancies in the House. Sometimes people are excused from being there that day. So, but at the end on the third, you need 102 votes. Then the bill goes to the Senate and goes through the whole same process. Gets assigned to a committee, has to pass the committee, can get amended in committee, goes to the Senate floor, may or may not be brought up, could get amended. So really, it is very difficult to actually have a bill become law because it has to go through this whole process in the Senate. If the Senate amends the bill, it comes back to the House because the bill the House passed is not the same language that now the Senate passed, and it comes back for a just one day up or down vote on what's called concurrence. And the House can choose to concur in Senate amendments or can choose not to. But let's say a bill passes clean, no amendments in the House, goes to the Senate, passes clean in the Senate, no amendments, it goes to the governor's desk. The governor can do three things. The governor can veto the bill, the governor can take no action for 10 days, and that bill lapses into law, or the governor can sign it into law. But it is a very, very cumbersome process to change the laws of the Commonwealth, because not only do you have some partisanship playing in, you also, and a lot of times battles aren't necessarily Republican-Democrat, they're actually regional.
Yes.
What may be good for southeastern PA may not be good for rural PA, or may not be good for urban PA. So a lot of times you'll have blocks of people voting their region regardless of party. Bucks County is pretty notorious for, we have a fair mix of Republicans, Democrats in the House. We have 10 seats, and we vote together on a lot of regional issues and stay together to protect our county and the interests of our county. But it is a very cumbersome thing to actually have a bill become law because of all of that process it has to go through, the partisanship that plays into it, and then also the regionalism that plays into it as well.
I think it's a great point. I think when you look at newspapers, you look at any sort of media, you think the whole world is Republican versus Democrat when you get into politics. And that's because that's what gets clicks and that's what gets people to read it. We joke, Melanie Shaw and I both have casino clients, and RD means nothing. RD doesn't mean a darn thing. It's what Frank just said. It's regions. It's where are they from. It's what's the culture in the region. Certain regions have more, well, call them flat out illegal gambling in their areas, in bars and taverns. In other regions, it's just not a thing. Where you are from the state. If you're from the T, what we call the T, northern Pennsylvania, central Pennsylvania, you look at issues so differently from somebody in Center City, Philadelphia, who looks at that issue entirely differently from somebody in suburban Philadelphia, who looks at that issue different from somebody in Pittsburgh, which is really a Midwestern city. It's really not an Eastern city. It's really interesting to see how it is. Mel and I joke all the time. I wish I just had issues that were Republican, Democrats, and I would know who to lobby, who not to lobby, and how to get things done. But that's just, it's not the way it really works out most of the time.
Insurance companies create a lot of revenue because of the added driver, as well as even if they are more susceptible to accidents, that means more revenue, I guess, because your insurance rates go up.
Something else to remember too, so Pennsylvania is very much an agricultural state. So at one time, I think the driving age was much lower, that your options for transportation are just growing.
Tomorrow, the Consumer Affairs Committee is going to consider Representative Pennington's bill.
Yeah, so I think it's important because like Uber and Lyft with like technology and everything are like taking a lot of like the younger people. They're starting to use that over like calling up a cab or like stopping for a cab.
I'm from central Pennsylvania. There are no taxi services where I'm from, and actually you can get an Uber. So I don't want them heavily regulated and taxed. I want them to be out there and be easily accessible and not as expensive as a taxi.
Those who smoked marijuana had an increase to schizophrenia and a decrease for the brain cortex, which causes issues with schizophrenia and mental disorders.
They did not know their limits. They did not know some side effects that could come from having too much of it, which I feel like especially in health classes, we talk about like that kind of stuff with like alcohol, like with like different levels and different types of intakes with that kind of stuff.
This can lead into issues with obesity, which is another growing crisis in the United States.
It's putting, keeping it at the age of 18 is putting commerce and monetary value over the health of the kids.
You're at a point where once you change that age, there are people who will be in between the years of 18 and 21 who could have gotten addicted while it was still legal for them to be buying it. Now they can't buy the products that they need, and then they're just gonna have to go through withdrawal, or they're gonna have to be forced to buy things illegally.
I think my grades, like if I don't do well on a test, I work hard on my homework and I study for the next one. But with a standardized test, I don't get that opportunity. I have to wait until next year.
Especially like big schools, like you apply to Penn State main campus, everyone has similar scores and stuff. They want to look at like the bigger picture, like your testings and standardized testing, SAT scores.
You don't want to go to college, it's meaningless. And we're at a stage now in society where we realize not everybody has to go to college.
I'm gonna pull up House Bill 1, recognize Representative Pennington to report on House Bill 1.
So I was part of the Consumer Affairs Committee, and we passed this bill unanimously, and it basically requires, like it says, it requires that all rideshare companies are taxed the same way by the state as taxi services are. And then we added an amendment that would just make sure that these rideshare companies are also regulated for safety reasons and just require protection of personal information of both the drivers and the passengers.
Okay. Do any other members wish to be recognized on this bill? Seeing none, so we'll do an up or down vote. So everybody voting in favor of the bill, please raise your hand. Everybody opposed? Put your hands on. Everybody opposed? Okay, it looks like the bill passes with one negative vote, so that's good. And what we have in Harrisburg, just so you know, at our desks in Harrisburg, there's a green button and a red button. There are two big screens, so when you vote, if you vote yes, your name goes green. If you vote no, your name goes red, and it does a tabulation, and that's actually our voting process. There are a couple things for voice votes, which we almost never do, but in reality, everything we're doing is a vote through the electronic system. So that is House Bill 1. Congratulations, Representative Pennington. House Bill 1 has passed the House of Representatives and now moves on to the Senate as reported. So House Bill 2 from the Education Committee, and that is Representative, is it Olovich? Olvaj?
Okay, so for our bill, it was for the Keystone exams, and it says that the bill provides that each high school senior may take and pass the Keystone exams, but are not necessary to graduate. So it's like optional, not mandatory.
So does anybody wish to be recognized on the Keystone Exams bill? Gentleman in the back, do we need to pass the mic back there, guys? And what do you seek to be recognized for? Interrogation, amendment?
Interrogation.
Interrogation. Will the gentle lady stand for interrogation? Yes, she will. Okay.
Senator Olivage. In many of the school districts around the state of Pennsylvania, they do not mandate that the Keystones are passed for graduation. Neshaminy School District is one such school district that, as a district, they chose to make this a requirement. So I'm wondering as to why you chose to say they are not necessary when they are already not mandated.
We're changing it more or less in the way that, as it is now, like, schools get to choose, like you said, whether or not they're a requirement. We're trying to make it so that's not the case, so that Neshaminy doesn't have the power to say you need this to graduate.
So this bill, if it becomes law, would not allow a school district to require it as part of your graduate.
See.
Okay. Representative, did that answer your question? Yes. Okay, does anybody else wish to be recognized?
So you're going to take away the Keystones. What equivalent are you going to have in order to, graduate the students?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so students need a certain number of credits to graduate, so that's what they would be, well, enforcing, I guess, still. And we wouldn't be completely getting rid of the Keystones. We would just make it like an option if students wanted to take them. So.
Representative, does that answer your question, or do you have a follow-up?
I think I have a follow-up. Congresswoman, are you already aware that you would need to pass a certain number of credits in addition to the Keystones in order to graduate?
Yeah, all right, her answer was yes. Do you have a follow-up to that?
No.
Okay. Are there any further members that wish to be recognized on the bill? Okay. We'll come to you next. For interrogation, amendment?
Interrogation.
Okay. Will the gentlelady stand for interrogation? Okay.
Ms. Olivage, I just would like to, I would just like to ask you, how are we going to regulate the teacher's job? How are they going to be shown that they're doing their job as they're giving us the information to pass these exams?
Because kids aren't failing their classes. Does that answer it, or?
Not really.
All right.
So we take testing at the beginning of like a course and in the middle to see like progress, and also grades throughout a course to see if students are passing or failing, and see if teachers are doing their job of educating students in that class.
Yeah, but students gotta do their work too.
Yeah.
And just so you know, by the way, when the debates go on, when there's an interrogation, obviously you're supposed to answer that question, but that was more of a comment, I think, right, at the end? No, I'm just something like, because then what happens is during interrogation, so that's intended for questions, and then members have the opportunity to just comment on the bill, so they don't have to ask the sponsor of the bill. they don't have to ask some specific questions. They can just comment and say, I think this is a bad idea. I think students should still be held accountable and have to take the Keystone exams. I'll be a no vote on the bill. So a lot of times members just get up and make comments on that as well, just so you know. So Grace, did you want to weigh in on the interrogation part of this or no? You have, all right, well, gentlemen, you were next.
Yeah, I have an interrogation.
You may as well just keep standing there, Representative. It seems like you're getting a lot of questions.
So, what I was having a question about was, since now it's not mandatory for the students to take it anymore, what would be the main purpose for the Keystone exams? Since it was originally sort of to show like how everyone was performing, now since kids can don't have to take it anymore, what is the real main purpose of the Keystone exam?
So the purpose now would be more like personal purpose, kind of like how the SATs are, how they're optional. If you wanted to see your own growth from PSSAs to the Keystone exams, or if you wanted to send in another scores for like college purposes or just to get a score on a more personal reason.
So through the Keystone exams, if the schools get scores in return and they score high enough, that provides more funding for the school through the state due to how well the school is performing. How do you suppose we're going to bring in more funding for other things we need in the school if we're not having exam scores go up to the state?
Can I help out with that one?
Yeah.
So what we did with these bills is we tried to make them that's a very good question. We tried to make them very basic because most bills are not one sentence. Some are, but the vast majority aren't. And anything that would have implications. So this bill, if there was funding tied to the Keystone exams, there would be further language in it. Any funding tied to Keystone exams will be redirected to the state education funding formula to be dispersed in that manner, if that makes sense, which is how the funds are dispersed. So it was a good question. In fairness to the representative, like the bill would be more engaged in that and actually address those kinds of points. So for the sake of trying to make it simple, we kind of kept them to a few sentences. Any further members seeking to be recognized? Okay, with that, we'll call up House Bill 2. Good job, Representative, by the way. All those members in favor of House Bill 2 will raise their hands. So you're voting yes if you want the bill? Somebody want to count? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, all those opposed? Nine. Okay, the bill passes 15-9. Congratulations, Representative. What? Well, we do have members that sometimes hide and don't vote, but we don't like that. So, all right, so we're going to move to the Health Committee and call up House Bill 3. And House Bill 3 is Representative Ellis. Microphone.
House Bill 3 was posted was passed in the Health Committee with one amendment, voted out unanimously, and we agreed that the Tanning Regulation Act required salons to be regulated, inspected, and post warning signs. However, we elected to decide that individuals under the age of 18 are prohibited to use tanning salons regardless of parental consent or not. So it's only 18 and older.
Right. So just so folks know, the bill originally, as presented to them, bans 16 and under and requires parental consent for 17. You amended it to ban 17 and under. So you eliminated the parental consent for 17-year-olds. Does anybody wish to be recognized on the bill? Gentleman there.
So move to interrogation. Why is there an age requirement on it?
were originally in favor of having the 17 and the 17-year-olds with parental consent because that does involve a responsible adult into the conversation. However, a committee member brought up that some children may feel pressured by their parents themselves to get tanning, just because some parents are concerned with the looks of image and that kind of stuff. And we just decided that indoor tanning for children that young who may feel pressure from the parents themselves could cause health issues in the future that they maybe didn't have full control over.
Any further members which to be recognized? Ashley, right behind you.
To interrogate?
Okay.
Okay, cool. Why was the age of 18 selected if parental consent wasn't considered?
Parental consent was considered for 17 because with this act originally it banned 16 and under regardless of parental consent or not, and it was 17 that required parental consent, but we moved it to 18 because that's the legal adult age where you can make your own personal decisions. Does that answer your question?
Any other members seek to be recognized? Okay. Oh, yep, one more over here.
I'm interrogating, is this specifically like tanning bed style like tanning salons, or is it spray tan as well? Or any other types of, I guess, fake tan?
It's just tanning beds that uses like UV rays on skin. It's not fake tan or anything like that.
Back row.
It's for interrogation again. Is it actually proven that there are negative health effects to the tanning salons? Or is that just an assumption?
It has been proven to cause skin cancer.
This is a motion to amend House Bill number 3.
Okay. What would your amendment be?
It would further define tanning salons as tanning beds as opposed to the possible confusion of tanning beds versus spray tans.
Okay. All right. So, Representative, are you okay with that amendment? Okay. So, members, here's what happens, Bill. So, again, as I mentioned earlier, amendments would be filed the day before. They would be in writing, so we would be very clear on what that amendment is. The Speaker would, on the second day of the bill, would call up that amendment. And what would happen in this instance is Representative Ellis would say, Mr. Speaker, it's an agreed to amendment. So we would still have to vote on it, but she would be okay, the general lady would be okay with her bill being amended that, but we still have to vote on it. So all the members that are in favor of the gentleman's amendment to provide clarification in this bill that this applies to UV tanning beds, is that correct? That's how you want it? Okay. Will raise their hands. So all members in favor of that amendment, please raise your hands. Opposed? Okay. So now the bill has been amended to include that language. Do any further members seek to be recognized? Okay. So now we're going to move to final passage of House Bill 3 as previously amended. So all members in favor of House Bill 3, please raise your hands. Those opposed? Okay. Congratulations, Representative Ellis, your bill passes. So real quick on a couple of these bills, when Ashley was putting these pieces of legislation together, we were trying to find topics that are applicable to your age. So House Bill 1, which was the ride sharing, that is actually a very hot topic issue. Taxi cabs are very significantly regulated, and ride sharing is not. Likewise, they don't pay the fees and taxes necessarily that the taxi industry does. Coupled with that, there are recent reports about sexual assaults and different things that are happening in ride-sharing vehicles. So that was where that bill came from. Keystone exams is always a hot topic in Harrisburg because a lot of our colleagues don't believe in mandates and standardized testing and imposing that on the school districts. So that's always a hot topic. The tanning regulation bill, believe it or not, was a bill that I authored that ultimately became law. So the bill as originally written, which bans 16 under, requires parental consent for 17-year-olds, And also there were other requirements in our informed consent of anybody going in to use a tanning bed and all is actually a bill that became law. Where that came about, and when Sean Schaefer was talking to you earlier about where bills come from, the Dermatology Association of PA came to me and asked me to help with that bill. It had failed in numerous other sessions, so we kind of worked on it. I actually wanted to ban all minors from doing it, what your bill ultimately did here, but we actually couldn't get the votes to do that. So our compromise was ultimately parental consent for 17-year-olds. It's called the prom exception, so that parents can allow their children to go get tanned for the prom. But that's actually where that bill came from, and that's actually the background on that bill. Didn't come from me. I didn't even really know a ton about the issue. To the gentleman's question here about is it really dangerous? I did a lot of research myself and really found out how damaging tanning is to people. I mean, we may as well be giving you a couple packs of cigarettes a day and telling you to go smoke rather than tan, because it'd probably actually be safer for you. So it is actually very dangerous, and I worked with the Dermatology Association to actually pass that bill. Something interesting, the American Cancer Society opposed that bill. So we're passing a bill to protect minors from exposure to something that's a known carcinogen. They opposed the bill because they wanted it to be 18, they wanted it to be a full 17 and under ban. So it's just an interesting dynamic of some of the craziness of how things go in Harrisburg, because you would think they would be happy with some regulation in Pennsylvania for minors, but they wanted an all or nothing. House Bill 4. So that is Representative Meyer.
Mr. Speaker, am I permitted to read a predetermined defense of my bill?
Sure. Why don't you state what your bill does, and then if you want to speak about the rationale of your bill, feel free.
Yes, thank you. Currently, this bill requires 3 to 5 reserve operatives of the Pennsylvania National Guard be stationed at each public and private school within the Commonwealth. Operatives will be upgraded to active duty salary and no cost to the schools. Operatives shall be stationed at the nearest National Guard barracks and will be transported to the school using state vehicles. The number of operatives stationed in each school will be proportional to the school population.
So in this bill, I'm sorry, okay, just so folks know, this bill as originally written said this bill allows for teachers to carry firearms in school and on school property. This is the bill as amended in committee. Go ahead, Representative Meyer.
My fellow representatives, I am here before you today in defense of the newly amended House Bill number 4. The old bill, as I presented before committee, had the following issues. On the surface, the bill appeared to be quite straightforward. If teachers are armed, possible school shooters will be deterred, and active ones can be neutralized before they are able to harm mass amounts of people. In theory, this bill, as it stands, would be highly effective, but will be quite difficult and expensive to implement. The average U.S. school district has 235 teachers, according to the U.S. Department of Education. It was estimated that a one-day firearm training course would cost one district $12,000 for all teachers attending. However, all teachers attending would be unrealistic. Every teacher would need a psychological evaluation for the safety of the students and teachers, another expense for every teacher. Those deemed unfit to carry firearms would not be attending the class, actually increasing the price of the course. Not to mention the course is only a single day. More days is more money. Additional expenses include firearm licenses, the weapons themselves, ammunition, and systems for safe storage. Overall, quite an expensive solution to what I am sure we all view as an issue. I then proposed an amendment to completely rewrite the bill on the following justifications. Currently, there are 15,500 National Guard Reserve operatives being paid on an annual salary for working unrelated jobs awaiting deployment. The annual salary for a first-year private is $3,385. This initially doesn't seem like a huge cost until it is factored that private is the most populated rank with increased pay for service time and rank. Why not pay them for actively serving the state instead? They would be upgraded to active duty pay and serve to protect the students with National Guard training. They are combat ready and far less likely to crack under pressure than a hastily trained school teacher. As for school resource officers, the National Guard would not replace them, but in situations of active threats, resource officers often wait for the SWAT team anyway. In addition, the operatives can serve as the National Guard recruiters and a bridge between school administrators and students, as a young operative would be far easier to approach than a school authority for many. And finally, these changes will only cost the state in an upgraded salary. Everything else necessary for the teachers would already be in possession of the state for the National Guard. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, are you willing to sink an all-encompassing bill over regionalism and partisanship? It combines student safety and cost effectiveness. Remember, think before you amend. Thank you, and I rest.
Okay. Do any members wish to be recognized on House Bill 4? Gentleman down here. We'll grab you next. For interrogation or amendment?
Interrogation.
Will the gentleman stand for interrogation?
Mm-hmm. So my question was, you said that you would upgrade the salaries to active duty. So have you taken in consideration the increase in the salary and how it would affect the taxpayers?
The increase in salary for National Guard would actually not be as heavy on the taxpayers as it would be arming teachers, because arming teachers is actually more expensive than it would be to upgrade National Guard pay and have them deployed at the schools.
Okay. Gentleman right here has to be recognized.
How would they rank? Like, you want to deploy operatives to the schools, but what would their rankings be?
The rankings wouldn't change from what rank they have in the National Guard. If promotions are necessary, promotions will be handed out, but this law would not be breaking the confines of the National Guard in the ranking procedure.
Let me answer your question.
It's not really what I was asking.
Do you want to re-ask it, or?
Yeah. I didn't mean would their rankings change when they're assigned to a school. I mean, like, would there be a regulation like, oh, if there's 3 operatives to a school, it would be like 2 privates and like somebody above them, or would it just be kind of whoever's available?
It would ultimately come down to the operatives available at the time. If there is a large populated school with, say, 5 operatives necessary, you might want to have a commanding officer in there so that it can establish more order amongst the school. But for something such as a small private school, it wouldn't need many operatives, and therefore you wouldn't need a commanding officer over them.
What if like the U.S. like government needs the operatives for service? Like, how would they go about that?
Well, as defined by Constitution, yes, the president has the power to call upon the National Guard to act in whatever military orders they give. However, we also have 3,000 to 5,000 active duty National Guard members already in place, deployed throughout the state. So if necessary, you can tap into the reserve forces in schools, but you can use the ones that are already in active duty first.
Don't you have to continuously pay like the people from the National Guard, but you'd have to pay for teachers like a class once a year and the guns once? Wouldn't it be like total more money for the National Guard?
The National Guard is paid regardless whether they're in reserves or in active duty. It would be more cost effective for us as a state to have them deployed and actually doing something related to their National Guard jobs rather than paying them $3,000 to however much they make based on rank when they actively work other consumer related jobs not related to the National Guard.
Have you considered the effect that this bill would have on the psychology of students who, for example, suffer from anxiety and other disorders, and seeing so many armed men at the same place at the same time.
In honesty, no, I hadn't considered that. However, with the presence of a strong force, it's meant for a dome of protection around the school rather than, they wouldn't be acting as law enforcement officers interrogating students or things of that nature. They're simply there as a protective force.
Approximately, what would the cost difference be between arming teachers and the National Guard?
Do you have a calculator? Because there are 500 school districts in the state of Pennsylvania. It would be $12,000 if we go by the national average for the number of teachers for one day in a class. Plus, you need to pay for firearm licenses, you need to pay for all the firearms, you need to pay for all the ammunition, you need to pay for safe storage, whereas the state has all of that and psychological evaluations when you go into training, and you would just have to pay an annual salary.
So, and folks, for the record, when we have bills that have a fiscal impact to the state, we get what's called a fiscal note. So if we were going to expand a program, that we would literally get a note that it's expected to cost XYZ dollars, $5 million or whatever. So before members vote, you generally have that information, just so people know.
How are you going to proportionately send out the members of the National Guard through all the schools if you have to include middle and elementary students, considering we only have about 15,000 privates available?
Well, if you divide them up by a population, 3 to 5 representatives per school out of 500 districts, you'd have about 2,500 if you sent 5 to every single school for just high schools, right? And then you have, say, 3 to 5 middle schools per district. Send out another 5 operatives. Let's say that's another 2,500 people. So you have 5,000, and you still have 10,000 left over without the elementary schools involved.
All right, so earlier you said something about how the National Guard members would not be there to interrogate or do anything to the students. So in the event that the National Guard members were there and an altercation broke out between some students, like let's say there was a fight, would the National Guard members be allowed to get involved in the fight and break it up?
School discipline is not dependent on the state, it is dependent on the school district itself. That would be delegated to the school administration and or a resource officer stationed there.
What if there's like none of them around? Would they just not be able to do anything? Would they just have to like find the resource officer?
The National Guard, under current state law, unless you're referring to the military police, are not a law enforcement division. They don't have the power to enforce rules. They're there as a protective agency.
Pass it that way.
Mr. Speaker, I move this call to a previous question.
Very good. So this is that procedural move that we were talking about. And we're only doing that not to cut you guys off, but we want to make sure we get through all the bills, and we're down to less than an hour left. So what would happen in this regard is a member could actually stand up and say, Mr. Speaker, point of order. And what happens is when that is done, the debate cease, the speaker would recognize the member. So you would say, Mr. Speaker, point of order, and we'd recognize the gentleman. And he would say he calls to move the previous question. So what that is that we would actually have a vote, which we're going to do right now, and that ceases all debate. And then once the debate is ceased, there will be an up or down vote solely on the bill. So all those in favor of moving the previous question, please raise your hands. Okay, those opposed? Okay, so debate cease. So now we will have an up or down vote on Mr. Myers' bill as written. So all those in favor of the bill, as amended. All those in favor of the bill as amended, please raise your hands. All right, those opposed? I didn't count. 13 in favor, 12 opposed? I thought that's what you were doing. You're doing this stuff.
I'm telling you something.
See, that's why it's easier to have the light up board that tabulates it for you.
There was a board malfunction. Do it again.
Yeah. All right. All those in favor, and please raise them high.
All the way up.
Yeah. All right. Those opposed, raise them high.
There we go. 16 to 12.
All right. Very good. Congratulations, Mr. Myers. Good work. Good preparation. I'll note the original bill about arming teachers, if I remember correctly, passed the Senate last session, and there was no action taken on the House. I don't know, Sean, if you correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. And I do want to note my one colleague, Zach Mako, he's a state representative from not too far from here, actually. He is currently deployed with our National Guard as a helicopter pilot serving in the Middle East. So we have a couple members of the PA House that are actually our National Guardsmen, and they both have been deployed numerous times. And unfortunately, they're away from the House, but they're obviously serving our country in harm's way. House Bill 5, I believe, was defeated in committee. Is that correct? Yes. All right. So House Bill 5 for the other committee members would have changed the driving age from 16 to 18, but that got voted down in committee. So on to House Bill 6. So House Bill 6 is Representative Manning.
So our bill was passed in the Consumer Affairs Committee by unanimous vote. So this bill is the purchase of fireworks by an individual who is 18 or older and is a resident of the Commonwealth can purchase fireworks from a licensed store, but we also added that the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission is to make regulations for the time of day, location, and distance from structures and other other public interest considerations. And it also establishes a license requirement for temporary tent sales of fireworks.
Okay. Does anybody wish to be recognized on the bill? Okay. All those in favor of House Bill 6 will raise their hands. It passes. All those opposed? Yeah, it's pretty one-sided. So, very good. Nice job. The background on House Bill 6 is this. I mentioned one of the things we do is pass the budget, the state budget in June. Well, we passed several bills with it, the fiscal code, the appropriations, the education code. And what happened was consumer-grade fireworks, so beyond sparklers, actually got written into one of the budget bills, and that's why fireworks are legal in Pennsylvania. I will tell you, among the top complaints we get in our office is people shooting off fireworks and disturbing their neighbors. And it was passed without all of the safeguards I personally think should be in effect. You guys covered some of the points with your amendment, but that's an issue that wasn't passed as a freestanding bill. It was all part of the budget, but may one day be reconsidered to kind of claw it back a little bit. So we're going to move on to House Bill 7 from the Education Committee. Representative Khan.
So this is the Safe to Say bill, and it allows an individual to submit an anonymous report via a phone, computer, or smartphone app. And we said that the bill should require law enforcement to administer the program, and they have to provide a school ID and password for law enforcement to use in the case of a false reporting. But will be redacted on all public reports. Law enforcement determines how the case is handled after an incident is reported.
Okay. Does anybody wish to speak on the bill?
I think that providing school ID and password is a little bit unnecessary, and if, for example, there was a situation where things took a criminal side and you may or may not have been involved, I think it would also criminalize the other student, and that would prevent them from trying to reach out to the system because they would not want to get in trouble for it.
So are you saying that as a comment, as a reason to vote no on the bill, or would you like to have an amendment and actually, I guess that's the second sentence there, actually strip out that second sentence where it relates to the school ID?
Amendment.
Okay. So the gentlelady would file an amendment that essentially strips out that whole second sentence relating to the school ID. Are there any questions on the amendment? Because then we'll come back to the bill. Are there any questions on the amendment?
It's more along the lines of a comment. I was on the committee, and the reason why we put the school ID in there is because we didn't want people doing false reports, and we've heard it's actually a problem right now, is that sometimes people actually do false reports and the police have to get involved. And, you know, we wanted to make it so people would stop doing the false reports. But if you notice later in the bill, it does say that that the school ID and password would be redacted from all public reports. So no one would know if, like, you made a false report, and then the law enforcement would not check the school ID and password unless it was a false report. If they were to investigate something and it was entirely false, then the law enforcement would then check the school ID and password. But if you reported something legitimately, unless you were found guilty yourself of a crime, they probably wouldn't be investigating you. They'd be investigating the person you reported.
Okay, any other questions or comments on the amendment?
I guess like a comment to the amendment is like requiring the thing kind of prevents people from speaking up, and like even if they don't, like I feel like nobody's gonna report it in case they end up self-incriminating them, and then you're not getting information you need.
How are you supposed to track the legitimacy of a report, of a comment? And if the comment is deemed legitimate, how are you able to locate where that comment came from?
So wait, is this on the amendment or is this on the bill?
Oh, I guess.
Yeah, so we'll come back to that. So we're just on the amendment right now. So any questions or comments on the amendment?
I guess, how do you find out who was to commit the false report if you say that their username and ID would be scrubbed off of all public records?
So is that a question for the maker of the amendment?
I guess that's the question for the maker of the comment.
Yeah, so if that's a question you want to answer to, that would go to the young lady in the front here who has the amendment. So do you mind answering that question? Yeah. Go ahead, you can pass the mic down to her.
Well, there would have to be a price to be paid, because I feel that if that is included, no one is ever going to just use the program. So if they want to have a program that has the ID and all of that, I'm assuming, which you didn't specify, so if you could specify, that'd be great. But if you are caught in doing a false report, is there are you reprimanded? Is there some kind of consequences and stuff like that? Because if yes, I feel like nobody's going to use the app regardless.
Well, I mean, I guess I kind of want to clarify. Like, it was stated that you had to put in your username and ID, but they would later be expunged from all records. Now, if there was a false report to be made and the username and the ID would be expunged, then how would you be able to track the person who originally made the report?
So I think what's going on here is the bill as written, the information's in there. If the person complaining, it ultimately is a false report, law enforcement could track them down through the ID and password. But for all other purposes, it would be redacted. And if it ended up being a valid complaint, it would be redacted and they wouldn't be able to tell who the complainant is. Is that as the author of the bill, is that correct? Okay. And the gentle lady thinks that people will be less inclined or won't complain if some identifying factor exists on who the complainant was. Is that correct? The person reporting the danger. Does that make sense? I think that's where we are. So are you on the amendment?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that if that would be true, then no one would ever call the police, because this is basically calling the police on someone or notifying the police anonymously. That's what you're doing, is you're notifying the police anonymously. And to say that no one would notify the police of something if your name was involved, that's kind of silly. People use the police every day. If you think there's an issue, like, you would still report something to the police, but you can do it anonymously through this, and they will not use your school ID or password unless it's a false report. So if you're not falsely reporting something, then you will remain anonymous the entire time.
And to be clear, so I believe the gentleman's speaking in favor of defeating the amendment. You're speaking in favor of a no vote for the amendment.
Yeah.
So what would happen is as we would be speaking on the floor, we would say, and I would recommend a no vote on this amendment, just so everybody understands what's going on. So does anybody else have any more comments on the amendment? Gentleman in the back.
I wish to edit or maybe add another part to the amendment, and that would be to add immunity of any legal actions that the person calling the report. So we have a similar kind of law in Pennsylvania, how it's just stated, don't run, call 911, and it gives immunity to the person reporting the illegal activity.
So where we are right now is we have an amendment before us. And are you asking to amend the amendment, or are you asking for a second amendment?
Second.
Second amendment, all right. So let's do a quick vote on the gentle lady's amendment, which in essence just strikes that second sentence relating to the school ID. Okay, so all those in favor of the amendment, so what that does is just takes out that second sentence, please raise your hands. Those opposed? Okay, so unfortunately, the amendment does not pass. So the gentleman back there wants to provide another amendment that provides immunity to anybody reporting the dangerous activity. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Are there any questions on that amendment? All those in favor of that amendment? All those opposed? Okay. So that amendment goes in providing immunity to the person calling to file the complaint. And we would probably have that cleaned up a little bit in the event that they were a co-conspirator or something with planning a school shooting or something, because obviously you wouldn't need immunity if you were innocent and just overheard somebody or saw something on Snapchat, Facebook, wherever. But all right, so now the bill has been amended to provide immunity. And if you're okay with it, let's make it immunity for any co-conspirators planning a dangerous activity that then report it. Is that fair? Does that make sense? Okay, all right. So now the bill sits as amended. Are there any questions on the bill as amended? Okay. All those in favor of the bill, please raise your hands. All those opposed? Okay. So very good. The bill passes. Congratulations, Representative Khan. So can I tell you the backstory? Actually, before you go to the next bill, can I tell you the backstory on that bill? Safe to say is law in Pennsylvania. I'm sure you guys know that, right? I hope you know that. There was a sign right outside of where we had lunch on one of the columns there about safe to say. Can I tell you how that started moving in Harrisburg? Dr. McGee. Does everybody know Dr. McGee here? Yes. Dr. McGee picked up the phone and called me and said, hey, Colorado has this program. I think it was right after the Parkland shooting. Colorado has this program. Maybe we can do something like that in Pennsylvania. So we started working on it in Harrisburg. The Senate was working on it as well. The bill that ultimately became law was the Senate bill. But at the end of the day, that program in part evolved because Dr. McGee did research here after the Parkland shooting to see what was out there. We don't always reinvent the wheel. We see good things going on in other states. But Dr. McGee called me, and that helped get the ball rolling ultimately in Harrisburg to actually have that as a resource platform here in Pennsylvania to hopefully, hopefully prevent some real bad things from happening. So when Sean Schaefer was talking about, hey, where do ideas come from? In this case, it was one of your administrators here investing time to try and find out things to make things a bit safer in these schools. So House Bill 8. I don't think there'll be much debate on this one. Legalization of marijuana. So who's our rep? Sorry, Ashley. You're too.
Sorry.
All right, who's up? Go ahead. Take the lead.
Okay, so the original bill stated that it was just legalization for recreational use, but the Health Committee added 5 amendments to legalization. The first amendment we added would be that it would be 21 plus for marijuana use. Second would be DUI. You cannot operate or drive heavy machinery or any vehicles while under the influence. Third would be FDA regulations that would require the FDA to write down exactly how much THC is included in the product and what is in the product, like you see on cigarettes along with warning labels and risks. And you would also have the FDA regulate it to make sure it's not laced, make sure it doesn't contain anything not for human consumption. Then you would have business regulations. Businesses can turn you down if you do not pass a drug test, if it would pose harm to someone by you doing your job while high. And then it's not allowed in public as well for people who either disagree with use or don't want, similarly to alcohol, they don't want you under the influence out in public in case of outbursts or any kind of dangerous issues.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions, interrogations, or?
I just have an interrogation. Would people be allowed to smoke marijuana in like smoker designated areas similar to cigarettes, I guess?
No, that would not be allowed because there's a lot of issues that can be related to marijuana, pertaining to public outbursts and other kinds of issues that do affect the brain with marijuana.
Okay. Question back there.
This is an interrogation. Why did you want the legal age to be 21?
So similarly, looking at alcohol, we wanted the age to be somewhere where your brain is technically considered fully developed, although there is some risks involved in the brain. Looking at the Colorado state statistics, according to the Department of Crime and Justice, the most common reason for school expulsion in high school seniors right now is marijuana use and drug use in school. So we wanted it to be out of the involvement of high school students and out of the involvement of people at that age group who are most likely to smoke in school. So it's related more towards schooling and age.
If someone is 18 years of age, they legally have to sign up for the draft. Are you saying that someone should not be able to smoke marijuana, but they should have the full cognizance to serve our country?
If I'm correct, I believe signing up for the draft requires you to have a drug test, and you are not allowed to be under the influence of drugs when you sign up for the draft or sign up for the military. You also need to have a stable frame of mind. Long-term effects of marijuana can also cause adverse effects on the brain, including impulse control, learning, and verbal memory. Those are not people we want in the military due to the fact that their impulse control may be off. They may have issues with memorizing different kinds of drills, issues, all kinds of, EAPs, emergency action plans, and everything. So technically, even if you were allowed to smoke marijuana at 18, you wouldn't be allowed to sign up for the draft, so it wouldn't be necessary.
I still have another follow-up. Under that circumstance, then you would be saying that anyone over the age of 21 or the age of 21, since they would be smoking marijuana, would not be signing up for the military anyway. Would you be proposing that no one over the age of 21 should be in the military? Because if you are 18 if the legal age for marijuana is 18, yes, you can't go to the military, but I don't think you should be restricted because of that. If we restricted people because they can't serve in the military because of certain things, then, I mean, I don't see the reasoning behind why you would make it 21 and not 18. Realistically, I don't think that having marijuana legal is, like, having long-term effects of them not being able to serve in the military. I don't think that justifies not making the legal age 18.
So the brain isn't really fully developed until it's 21. If you're 18 and you're smoking marijuana or using alcohol, like your brain is more vulnerable to being stunted by it. So that's like one of the main reasons why it's 21. Like at 21, you're fully able to make your decisions, and it's just a better age. Like it also would keep it out of the hands of high schoolers. It's not saying like once you're 21, you can't be signed up for the draft. Like if you're not using marijuana, like you can still be signed up for it at 21. It's not proposing a cutoff. It's just proposing that you wait until your brain is more fully developed.
We also stated under business regulations that businesses can deny and turn you down if you test positive for their drug tests, because it is actually dangerous to be under the influence or have the effects on your brain under in business.
I would like to propose an amendment.
Okay.
I would like to change it to 18 years of age, and because schools can regulate like drugs and alcohol on their property, so that could limit that.
So yeah, you'll be able to comment on it. So hang on a second. So we have an amendment before us that simply just changes 21 to 18, correct?
18.
Yep. Okay. So the maker of the bill gets to comment on the amendment, of course. So.
How do you propose that we're going to regulate that in school? Because if you walk into our bathroom, we have kids that are doing drugs in the bathroom every time you walk in there. The schools don't regulate it. Because
Yep.
Well, we have like rules on our school property that you can't have drugs or alcohol, and whether people do it or not is just what we have to enforce. It's not really pertaining to the bill.
So considering that, looking at Colorado's statistics right now, the reason or most common reason for school expulsion since legalization would be marijuana and drug use in school, pertaining to marijuana. So what would you propose if we're going to police that more in schools and police drug use in schools? What would that involve, and what would the cost be to the average taxpayer, because we already pay really high taxes for school? So how would that cost and affect the taxpayer as we're regulating it?
Well, we would have a fiscal note on the so there'd be a fiscal note on the amendment if there were any true costs that could be attached to that. So, and I think some of that's just going to be a policy component on your belief as to whether or not it should be 18 or 21. So, I mean, they're a good point. So let's just have, again, in the sake of getting through the bills, let's have one more comment on the amendment, and then we'll vote the amendment. So is that what you want to comment on the amendment?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that someone said that when your brain is fully developed is 21. It's not, it's 25. So the 21 years of age doesn't necessarily make sense if we are going to be making a legal age for drugs by note of like whether your brain was developed, the legal age would be 25.
So you're making that as part of your argument for the 18
Yes.
to lower it to 18?
I still want it
Okay.
to be 18, and I don't think whether your brain's fully developed or not matters necessarily. I think government restriction is not a good thing in most cases.
Since you're the prime sponsor, Bill, we'll let you have one final comment on the amendment.
So
Not a question, just make a comment.
Oh, okay. So considering that you say that the age is 25, does that mean we should then raise the adult age to 25 when we're all fully developed?
Okay.
And that would also mean raise the tobacco age, raise the drinking age from 21?
Okay, so on the amendment to change it from 21 to 18, all those in favor, please raise their hands. All right, those opposed?
To 12.
The amendment passes. So now it's 18. So now we are on the bill. So, but here, this is an example of something that happens. So, one, the prime sponsor, Ms. Schoen, may not want it to be her bill, and he may not want it to be her bill because she may only be okay with 21. So sometimes people remove their names. It's very infrequent. Or she may also actually recommend voting against the bill if 21 is, she feels so strongly about 21 rather than 18. Just so you know, like, there's these crazy dynamics that happen. Usually what happens is we go over the bill, we don't vote it, and then everybody gets together and figures out what the solution's gonna be. So we're just gonna have maybe two people speak on it. If you wanna speak on 18, that's fine, or the gentleman over here was in favor. If not, that's okay. We want the prime speaker to speak about the bill now, since it's now 18 instead of 21, because now we're gonna have the final vote on the bill. So Grace, do you wanna speak on that, Ms. Schoen? Okay, so you would actually be recommending to vote against the bill at this point? Yes. Okay. Is there anybody else that was on the health committee that feels the same way? Yes. Yeah, okay. So several members of the health committee are now opposed to the bill because of the change in age. Okay, does anybody want to speak in favor of the bill before we have final vote? No? Okay. So all those in favor of the bill as amended, with everything written on here except, oh, you already changed it. Thank you, 21's 18. You're on the ball. So, the bill as written as you see it. All those in favor, please raise your hands. Those opposed? All right, the bill passes as amended. So folks, let me ask you just a general question for my own knowledge. How many people here think marijuana should be recreational marijuana should be legal in Pennsylvania?
I'll walk out.
Doesn't mean they're doing it. It could just be their opinion. How many oppose it? Okay. Just curious what the sense is. There are bills in Harrisburg. We haven't had any votes on any of them. What Grace was citing from Colorado are some pretty strong statistics, and we'll talk more about a little bit of that in a second. So now another one that you may have a lot of opinions on, House Bill 9. So this bill was amended. So the original bill, just so you guys know, the original bill actually increased tobacco and vaping product sale ages from 18 to 21, and then also created the Licensure and Regulatory Act, which remained there. So you struck out the ages, correct, in committee?
Yeah.
Okay. So which would just drop it to keep it at 18, essentially. So Ms. Allen, Representative Allen, it's your bill. Well, if you just want to make a few points on what the committee thought or why you guys did what you did.
So basically, we got rid of the ages because just people who are doing it even younger than 18 illegally. So there's no point in changing it because at that point, you might have people who are doing it legally at 18, and then when you change the age, now there's a gap of people 18 years to 20 years old that could possibly be addicted to the substance already, and now there's no way for them to buy it in a legal way because they're not of age. So that's going to create a whole new group of problems for people. So that was one of the main reasons to not change the age.
Okay. Does anybody, there's a few folks for interrogation and or questions.
I would like to propose an amendment to this bill.
Okay, what would your amendment be?
That the previous amendment be struck.
Okay. So what that means is the bill would revert to, the bill increases Pennsylvania's minimum legal sales age for tobacco products, including vaping products, from 18 to 21 years of age, and then this would actually be the second sentence for that. Okay, are there any questions on the amendment? All those in favor, do you want to speak on the amendment? Anybody from the committee? From Judiciary? Anybody else that was on the committee want to speak?
There's just a comment. So The reason why we struck it out also was because we could not make a decision on the age because there was two big opposing sides, one for 18, one for 21, same thing with marijuana. And I feel that if we do add this amendment, the regulation would just not be passed because people will be against the ruling like it was before. So,
Okay.
yeah, it might just completely, this bill might not pass if we add the amendment. So better to have regulation than no regulation, you know?
Okay, any other comment? You want to comment on the amendment real quick and then we'll vote on it?
Representative, I'm in favor of the complete outlaw of tobacco and vape products. This amendment is a favor to you to save my vote.
And from time to time, things like that happen on the floor as well. So, okay. All those in favor of the amendment, which, again, to be clear, reinserts the age limit for tobacco and vaping products, minimum age to be 21, please raise your hands. All those opposed? Okay, so the amendment goes down. So now we will vote, unless somebody has comments or interrogation, we will vote. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Wait, this is about the bill, right?
Yeah, we're on the bill as written right here.
Okay, I just had I guess a question of clarification. So it says regulating the online sales. I'm just confused about, are we just regulating online sales or are we just banning all vape? Like, what's
It
going on?
does three things. So it would be more defined in real legislation,
Yeah.
but the Vaping Products Licensure and Regulatory Act, in this case, regulates online sales of vaping products, enhances consumer safety, and creates penalty for unlawful product distribution. So that's what it would do. I mean, there's various components of it.
So is this one theoretically just like banning?
It wouldn't ban it, it would regulate it.
Okay.
So it would
That's
set standards.
Okay. All right.
Any other questions? Grace and the gentleman over there.
I'd kind of like to propose an amendment here.
Okay.
Coming from like the health committee's standpoint, we should probably have some kind of way to regulate and put FDA regulations on what is being sold online, because there are some places where it's sold and it's laced with all kinds of stuff like vitamin E, which is very dangerous towards lungs to be inhaled, etc.
So if we can, just for the sake of continuing to move, let's just presume that that's part of regulating online sales, that it cites the FDA. And gentleman over there.
I move to add an amendment to the current bill to where, in addition to all the new regulations, we should, on all the packaging of the vapor and tobacco sales, we should put, I guess, kind of facts on the dangers, because
why don't we factor that as enhancing consumer safety? Would that work?
Yeah, that'll work.
All right. So we're going to operate under the presumption of both of your points are in the bill already. Is that? Okay. All right. Cool. One more in the back, and then we'll keep it moving because we still have one more bill to get to.
I would like to propose an amendment.
Okay.
In order to save my vote yet again, I would like to triple the cost of all tobacco and vapor product sales.
So, all right. So let's make your amendment this. There's a 300% tax on the cost. Okay.
Correct.
Is that all right? We'll make it that way. And in fairness, stuff happens to actually discourage things by you put high taxes on it. There's a 12% tax on fireworks in addition to 6% tax. So, one comment on it, and then we'll vote the amendment.
I amend to change the wording on the current amendment because I personally believe that saying triple doesn't have the same effect as 300%, because 300% could have it killed in the vote and would be a terrible misjustice to the people who try to buy these products.
So, unfortunately, we can't amend amendments as a House rule, and I think the gentleman with his 300% or triple tax is exactly doing that, trying to discourage purchasing by making it unaffordable. But we can never question the motives of a member on the floor, by the way, just so you know. So let's do an up or down vote. You agreed it was a 300% tax?
Yes.
Okay, so it would add a line here creating a 300% tax on the sales of vape products. All those in favor? We may be solving the state budget problem right here with a big tax. All those opposed? Oh, by one vote. Good effort, though.
Yeah, come on, you know who you are. One person did leave.
Okay. Well, that's as close as you can get. All right, so we're going to vote on the bill as presented here. So all those in favor of creating the Vapor Products Licensure and Regulation Act, please raise your hands. And, yeah, passed. All those opposed? Yeah. So, Ms. Allen, congratulations, but to a point Ms. Allen made, which I think is also an important point, there's a lot of times, sometimes we have to legislate things to protect people from themselves, and I know that sounds kind of silly, but that really does happen. And sometimes, there's that whole saying about you take a half loaf of bread instead of the whole loaf sometimes, and that Ms. Allen was correct in what she was saying that, I'm putting words in your mouth, but essentially you were saying that if we don't pass this, there's nothing to protect these people, so we're at least doing something to help them, right? Yeah, oh, I'm sorry, you said that, sorry.
Yeah, okay.
But, okay.
I agree with you.
But no, I mean, that is an important thing, because a lot of times we don't fully get what we want. So the final bill relates to DUI sentencing enhancement. So we're going to turn it over to Representative Billett.
The bell is going to ring. I have passes already written out for you, so that all I have to do is put the minutes in there. So when the bell rings, don't worry about it. Keep going until you're done, and I've got passes ready for you to go to the next period class.
Okay, so this will be the final bill, then we'll do a quick wrap up.
For life. Hype up Mr. Heaney.
All right, Representative?
So this bill, with the amendment passed in the Transportation Committee unanimously, it basically adds sentence enhancement to anyone who's convicted of a DUI involving drugs and alcohol together rather than just one or the other. And the amendment that was made was originally the sentence enhancement is only for homicide, but now it's changed to any DUI involving an injury, death, or property damage.
Okay, and folks, just so you know what a sentencing enhancement is we have sentencing standards for if you're convicted of a crime, you could be sentenced to 12 to 24 months for a particular crime, we'll say. What an enhancement does is enables the prosecutor to request, so in the case of this language, I believe it's an additional 6 months ultimately, but request an additional 6-month sentence if the person fell in this classification, and then the judge could add that. So let's say the particular DUI was, no longer than 12 months in jail. Under that statute, the prosecutor could ask for additional time based on these facts. So that's what a sentencing enhancement is. So are there any questions, interrogations, amendments on this bill? No? Okay. All those in favor, please raise your hands. All of those opposed? Okay, congratulations. That may have been the simplest one of the day. Can I tell you the backstory on the bill? Part of my legislative district includes Southampton, and a gentleman by the name of Esposito came to meet with me. His son was killed in a DUI accident, and the driver had both alcohol and drugs in his system. If you go north on Street Road, or I guess it's technically west, I believe there's a DUI memorial sign right in front of the Southampton Firehouse. That's where the accident happened. But again, to what Mr. Schaefer was talking about earlier, when Mr. Esposito came and told me the facts of the case, we've talked about a little bit about alcohol and tobacco and some drugs today. You don't know what the interaction is going to be with alcohol and drugs, right? So if you're taking an illegal drug and alcohol and you're getting behind the wheel, nor do you know what the interaction is going to be if somebody's on multiple drugs. And that part of the impaired driving, there was nothing to ensure that the offender was sentenced to more time in jail other than just the vehicular homicide. The bill has not moved yet. It's still sitting in committee in the House, but that's where it came from. We have done some work with DUIs. We covered a couple other bills. Yeah, we've covered a few other things. Driving while suspended.
Unlicensed drivers.
Yeah, unlicensed drivers. We've been able to cover a few other things that impact it, but this bill, unfortunately, is one we have not been able to get moving. So, in all honesty, please raise your hand if you're okay with it. If not, it's okay. Was this a good experience? Did you guys actually learn a little bit about the legislative process, and did you learn how messy it really is? So think about this. We talked about the regions of the state, and you got the parties that sometimes battle. You got the regions of the state. Well, we're all from essentially the same area, right? We're from Feasterville, Trevose, Langhorne, Levittown, right? I mean, we're all from the same area here, and you saw just some of the differences. And then when you have that big pot that you throw all of us in, that big melting pot that's Pennsylvania, it makes things more challenging. And people have different views on some of the different issues, and you saw some of that come through. And one of the things I talked about with one of the committees was we can't be experts on everything. Think about, we just voted on 10 bills that cover a whole myriad of issues, right? Education, consumer affairs with ride sharing, school safety, driving age got voted down, legalizing marijuana, criminal justice with DUI. I mean, just think about all those different things we just talked about in the last couple hours. And think about when we're on the House floor and we actually vote 15 bills in a given day. Plus we had some committee votes on some other bills earlier in the day. And then the next day we're voting a bunch of other bills. We can't be experts on everything. And that's why we rely on the government affairs folks, the lobbyists. And I think they all had to go back to work, but I do want to thank them because they took time away from their workday to be here to help the process along. But we really rely on people coming that understand the issues and are honestly going to present us the facts we need to do the best job we can. So, but I think you guys did a great job. I appreciate you being here.